Straight to the business then, and Owen Fairclough is here at the start of yet another busy week of Eurozone posturing, the leaders racking up the air miles. The market's optimistic for now, at least.
They certainly are, yeah. I'm glad you added that caveat, Stuart, because as we've seen, I think we might have said crucial week at least 6 times.
I think every
in
week
as many
for the
months.
last year, isn't it?
But it is a busy week in Euroland, of course. We've got Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy meeting in Paris a little later. Italian budget cuts, and that's mainly what the markets like the look of. The Italians did get ahead of the markets a little bit. And managed to give Asian markets and indeed the European markets a little bit of a lift this Monday morning. You can see they're all up. Crucially, perhaps, the Italian, the FTSE MIB in Milan, up 2% at the opening. You can see it just at the bottom of your screen there, which is a pretty solid endorsement of this caretaker government's policies. The Asian markets, I mentioned, a reasonably good day's trade as well. The Nikkei finishing around 0.5% up. The Hang Seng in similar sort of territory. Just the Shanghai Composite letting the side down a little bit. The reports, lots of investors a little bit shaky about China right now, withdrawing some of their yuan deposits after news that the Chinese economy is slowing down just a little bit.
So, as we've said in the news bulletin, Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy meeting here in Paris just a few hours from now. Their aim, well, is to get the ball rolling on bringing Europe even closer together. The idea is to harmonise taxes and budget so that all Eurozone members keep their spending in check. We're going to go and to Berlin, get the German take on this by crossing to Jessica Salt. She's there in Berlin. Jessica, this idea is, as usual, I suppose, fraught with complications because there are conflicting opinions about what the European Central Bank is actually for.
Absolutely, and I think it's, of course, crucial that Merkel and Sarkozy really iron out their differences ahead of the Brussels summit later this week. And on the talk in today's lunchtime meeting will, of course, be this fiscal union that Merkel proposed on Friday, a tighter fiscal and budgetary union between Eurozone states that will, of course, include, she wants sanctions against those who do not keep their fiscal houses in order. But also, crucially, back on the agenda is the role of the ECB. We know that France are very worried about losing its AAA credit rating, of course. I would like to see the ECB intervene more and step up its purchasing of bonds from debt-ridden Eurozone countries. This is something that Germany has always slapped down and negated quite strongly in the past. But analysts here now speculating that Angela Merkel could be softening her stance on the role of the ECB. While she doesn't want it to be seen to bowing to political pressure, she might actually agree to, we've seen her rhetoric change over the last few days, during a speech to Parliament on Friday, while she underlined the importance that the ECB remains independent. It's thought that she might see fit the ECB purchasing bonds from debt-ridden Eurozone countries over the next while as a sort of bridging system until these proposed fiscal and budgetary systems that she's proposed could come into play. And she's also perhaps softening her stance on Eurobonds, something that very few people thought could actually happen. But while she said recently that they might not be the solution for now, she hasn't ruled them out altogether. So it's going to be interesting to see how today's meeting pans out.
May get Eurobonds after all. We'll wait and see. All right, Jessica, thanks very much. There's Jessica Saltz there in Berlin.
And of course, much of those discussions today, Stuart, about harmonising taxes, about imposing just a little bit more budget responsibility, all those kind of things are aimed at countries like Italy, one of the most indebted Eurozone countries and indeed one of the most indebted Western countries right now. The caretaker government there has drawn up an emergency decree with a raft of new taxes across the board. The cuts are likely to be very painful. One minister openly wept over the impact that these cuts will have on pensions. But as Winnie Andrews reports, Italy needs to save billions of euros so that it can balance its budget within the next 12 months.
A debt reduction plan to stave off bankruptcy. After meeting for 3 hours, the Italian cabinet approved 20 billion euros in austerity measures.
This is to help Italy to come out of a very grave crisis, an international crisis, a crisis that reflects problems of the Italian economy and society.
The cabinet meeting was originally planned for Monday, but in a sign of its importance was moved up to Sunday so that budget reforms could be finalized before markets opened. The package includes measures to raise the minimum retirement age for both men and women to 66, increase taxes on housing and luxury items and the value-added tax, implement measures to fight tax evasion, and cut political costs. Prime Minister Mario Monti announced he would forego his own salary as part of the effort. But the minister in charge of pension reform broke down in tears when she announced the measures, while protesters voiced anger with their new prime minister.
Former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi had his faults, but we expected different things from Monti, not just this rise in taxes.
The Italian parliament is expected to approve the measures in coming weeks. Many are worried that without action, Italy's high borrowing costs, massive debt, and low growth will throw the country into bankruptcy.
Well, if you're watching all of that from Ireland, you'll know a thing or two, unfortunately, about austerity measures. The Irish Prime Minister has warned the Irish people that there will be years more of hardship ahead. He made his first address since becoming Prime Minister just a little bit this year, intending to sweeten the pill a little bit of nearly €4 billion in cuts on top of around 4 years of austerity measures imposed over 4 austerity budgets, I should say, imposed in the last 3 years. All of this, of course, aimed at meeting the terms of an IMF and EU bailout. Here's Irish Prime Minister Enda Kenny.
We all know that if in our own lives we are spending more than we are earning, we have a problem. Right now, the state is spending 16 billion a year more than it is taking in. This problem will not be fixed unless we take action to bridge this gap.
Enda Kenny there. Well, Evi Emmerich has been following that address from Dublin. He joins us now. Evi, some tough love there, and Irish people have had quite a bit of it already, haven't they?
Absolutely. Well, the major difference with France and Germany is that Ireland has faced several austerity budgets already, and as a result, there is no fat left to trim. 2.2 billion of cuts in public expenditure will be announced today. 500,000 of cuts in health, 500,000 in social welfare. Child benefit will be lowered for the third child. Once again, the most vulnerable will be hit severely, despite the fact that Enda Kenny has promised to protect the children, the sick and the elderly. All the more since there will be a hike on indirect taxation to raise 1.6 billion euros. That will be announced on Tuesday in the Irish Parliament by the Finance Minister. 2 points rise in VAT to the rate of 23%. Car tax, alcohol, tobacco will be on the rise also. All that, obviously, will hit everybody, including the most vulnerable.
Evi, thanks very much. That's Evi Emmerich, our correspondent there in Dublin.
Just worth mentioning as well, Stuart, interesting that Enda Kenny, the Irish Prime Minister, also opposed to any sort of revision of the treaty, and that's going to be very much on the cards with this discussion between Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy. Any sort of fiscal union, budget responsibility, they'll have to get into and unpick this Lisbon Treaty, which, remember, took not one but 2 referendums to actually push through. So very, very complicated stuff. But let's leave the Eurozone alone for a moment and get a little bit more of the day's company news for you. EDF shares have edged up nearly 1% after announcing a €1.8 billion investment in Poland. The power giant will build a coal-fired plant in Rybnik, part of a 10-year expansion that will draw 25% of energy from fossil fuels, but with reduced carbon emissions. EDF made the announcement just hours after Greenpeace activists stormed one of its nuclear power plants here in France.
Investigators looking into the Olympus scandal say the Japanese camera maker hid up to $1.7 billion of losses from investors. The Nikkei newspaper says a preliminary report will be released on Tuesday, 2 months after SAC Chief Executive Michael Woodford blew the whistle on the accounting fraud. It's understood the inquiry hasn't found any links to organised crime and will stop short of recommending key executives be prosecuted. That's all we've got time for.
I believe we have
We're
run
out
out of time.
All right, Owen, thank you very much. That's Owen here with the business, and Claire's going to be here really shortly with the latest headlines here on France 24. Stay with us.